Hi there, and welcome to Talking True, where I speak to near death experiences, mystics, healers, and people who have incredible stories to tell. And on that note, I have someone joining me today who has a very special story. Her name is Caryn Machado, and she is a death care consultant. So, welcome, Caryn. It's really great to have you with me today.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
So, do you want to start? I mean, that's kind of an unusual profession or interest or whatever you want to call it.
It
How did you
is.
how did you come to this kind of work?
Well, I think sometimes in life you do a 180 and you weren't really expecting to do this 180, but life carries you in a direction that happens. And I'll tell you my story. A little bit of a trigger warning. It's kind of a sad story. For some people, it's very hard to hear, but I'm a better person because it happened and it's all okay. So if you're willing to bear with me, I'm willing to share it. So back in 2007, I was expecting my second child. I was working at a title company, which here in California, we close deals on houses, and we're kind of the Switzerland where we work with all the parties to make things happen. And I was about to have my child, and there was rumor that layoffs were coming. And sure enough, they said, okay, a lot of us are getting laid off. That includes you. And I said, can I just go on maternity leave? So I did. And I was lucky. I had about a month before I had him and I luckily was able to keep my insurance. But, and I'm going to give you this first little premonition that something was wrong, but at that time, I couldn't even fathom it. We were setting up the crib and the changing table, and I was very pregnant, probably 8 months. And I remember looking around the house, and I'm getting covered with chills right now. So I think I'm clairsentient. I think he might be with us. But I remember looking at around the house, and I couldn't picture him anywhere. I couldn't picture him in the living room. I couldn't picture him on the changing table. I couldn't picture him anywhere. And I thought, well, that's strange. And I just kind of let it go. I decided that that was not something that I was going to even fathom at that moment. So I went into labor and ended up at the maternity hospital, and nothing was happening. They were like, well, you're really moving along, but he doesn't seem to be progressing. So, well, we're gonna, call these other nurses in, and they hooked him up to a heart monitor, and I'm trying to, it's hard. Some of that night was so difficult, but they hooked him up to a heart monitor, and I remember being in labor for a really, really long time, and nothing was happening. He was not progressing. He was not moving. He was not coming along. And so all of a sudden, I look up and I see the nurse whispering something to the doctor. And it had been hours, probably about 10, 12 hours that I had been in hard labor. And all of a sudden, she grabs the suctions him out. I remember looking at him, he was blue. They put him on my chest for probably a nanosecond, took him and ran off with him. And I'm looking at my husband and I thought, what is going on? What is happening? And, one of the nurses came and said, well, we don't know, but we have to take him for testing and see what's going on. They came back in. They said that they had managed to restart his heart, but they had to call a team from San Francisco to fly in and to try to help him. And at that time, we didn't really know what was wrong. We had no idea what was wrong. It was just, we were just waiting. And the team eventually got there. I think it took them about 45 minutes. They actually flew them in on a helicopter and they evaluated him. And then they walked in, and I could tell by the look on their faces that he was not going to make it. And they said that because of the suctioning, that he basically had a heart attack and he had a lot of brain damage from the very swift delivery. And I found out much later I had something called he had something called shoulder dystocia, which is the baby's shoulder is lodged in your pelvis. He was not going to come out that way. It was basically impossible for me to push him out. It was absolutely impossible. So The team said, look, we could take him and try and extend his life, but he's not going to make it, and it's better that he dies with you. So, um, sorry, this is hard to talk about. They set him, my little angel, on my chest, and I could hear him struggling to breathe. And I remember I thought, I don't even know what his what he looks like. I hadn't seen him. And so I set him down on the I got, I was struggling to get up because I had been in labor for so long, my legs were shaking. And I struggled to get up and I put him on the bed. And I remember he couldn't open his eyes because he was so brain damaged. They told me that. And I pried open his eyes because I wanted to see what his eyes looked like. And they were these beautiful, like hazel brown, gorgeous, big eyes. And he had this fine dusting of this brownish blonde hair and very fair. And, I should show you a picture. I'm going to show you a picture of my baby. Oops, can you see him? Wrong way.
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow.
There
What a
he
little
is.
angel.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. So he was just adorable and precious. And I remember thinking I wanted to change his diaper. And so I was kind of doing this, even though I knew he wasn't going to make it. I just wanted to change his diaper and to say that I did. And so I put a fresh diaper on him. I put this cute little Winnie the Pooh outfit on him. And then I got back in bed because I couldn't stand anymore. I was so shaky and so tired. And I put him back on my chest. And I remember listening to his labored breathing because he had inhaled meconium during his delivery and his lungs were just filled with fluid. And so he was struggling to breathe, struggling to breathe. And I remember thinking, I want to stay awake for every last moment of his life. And I couldn't do it. And I don't know if spirit thought it was better for me to be asleep when he passed. I don't know what happened. And I don't even know how much time had passed, but it was December 5th. It was shortly after 5 a.m. And when I woke up, he was gone. And my little angel died in my arms. And I
mm,
think it's just one of those moments in your life that you are just in absolute shock. And you think, how is this possible? This happening? I'm not leaving the hospital with my baby. The funeral home has to come get him. And I remember we called the priest and I remember them drawing this little cross on his forehead with the holy water, holy oil. I don't even know what it was. I was so out of it. And having to walk away from that hospital and leaving my baby lying there was just the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life.
mm,
Truly the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And I went home and I was just in absolute shock and cried and cried. And this went on, as you can imagine, for a long time. And the funeral even seemed surreal, putting him in the coffin. I thought, wait, what? How is this happening? How
mm,
is this happening? And my premonition, right, turned out to be true. He never came home. My little
mm,
baby just ended up buried. And so I would say for weeks, I was crying, weeks and weeks. And I would just, sometimes, and I think I hated being alone. And I think the hardest days were when my husband would go to work and my family, eventually everybody left and I was alone. And I remember throwing myself onto the floor one day and just sobbing. And I did have an older son, by the way. And
mhm,
he had a really hard time because, what's wrong with mom? Why is she like this? What's happening? And he was in middle school, of all things. To be in middle school when your mother's just, at her wit's end. I mean, I could barely cope with anything, but I would drive my older son to school and that was a good distraction. But then I'd come home to an empty house and I would end up on the floor in a fetal position, just, holding myself, just sobbing, sobbing, sobbing. And I remember at one point the anger hit. And I think that no one really prepares you for the anger. And I remember screaming at the top of my lungs, and I'm not going to scream now because that would startle everybody truly. But I remember screaming, "Where is my baby? And why did you take my baby? Why me?" And my family just were at, they didn't know what to do. They really didn't. They thought, oh, let's cheer her up and we'll take her to Monterey, which I'm sure you're familiar with. It's this beautiful little seaside town. And all we saw were families pushing strollers around. And I practically ended up on the sidewalk, just beside myself with grief and, just could barely breathe. And they decided, okay, that was a bad idea. Took me back home. And this went on for a really long time. And I remember one day it occurred to me that grief felt like a 50-pound weight. It felt like I was carrying this weight around, this incredibly heavy weight. And I thought, I have to do something. I have to do something. And I remember I just put on my jogging clothes and ran down the street. Just ran until I just collapsed on the sidewalk. And I thought, well, that feels better.
Yeah.
It felt better to just run. And then I had this, huge epiphany that grief is just energy. And I think once I had that realization that running down the street helped, I thought, okay, what can I do? So I started going to jazzercise, which has been around for a long time. I remember my mom taking me to jazzercise classes. And so I started doing that. And then one day the instructor had just had a baby and started talking about her baby. And well, that just did me in all over again. I had to leave. Going to the grocery store was hard. Would have to leave when somebody was pushing around a baby cart. And I finally got tied in with this group called Helping After Neonatal Death. They're called Hand of the Monterey Bay Peninsula. And whereas all these, I finally found some solace where there was all these other mothers that had also lost their children, and we could talk to each other about this child that was so loved that never made it into this physical realm. And that helped a lot. But eventually I realized that talking about it wasn't helping and exercise wasn't enough, that I had to do something else because the grief was just a lot. And I finally decided I needed to talk to him. And a lot of people are very skeptical of that because, I will admit that there are some people out there that can't really talk to people on the other side. They pretend that they can, but they don't.
Mm.
So I spent a lot of time searching for someone that I thought could help me talk to him because I thought I'm never going to get past this if I can't talk to him. And so I did. I found a woman named Linda Drake, and she's actually written a book called Reaching Through the Veil to Heal that was incredibly helpful to me. But that helped. I actually flew to Arizona to meet with her. That was the closest because she's based on the East Coast, and that was the closest we could get to each other. So I met with her, and we hadn't told her anything about him. And she started talking about details of his birth and his death that weren't possible for her to have known. So I knew she was the real thing. And he actually apologized. He said he saw what I was going through and he felt terrible about going through it, about me, what I had gone through. And I told him, I said, I forgive you, but I don't understand. And through Linda, I was able, and we met with him and her for a couple hours. So there's too much really to relay here. But I came to understand that he had, in his two previous lives, he had been abused badly by his mother. And he did tell me, you were not my mother in my previous lives. Don't worry, it wasn't you. And he wanted to come in to feel loved. And apparently, and I wanted to kick myself, but apparently I agreed to this before I came here. And a beautiful dove just flew behind you, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I agreed to this at a higher level. I agreed to have him briefly in my life and show him what unconditional love was. And like I said, I wanted to kick my higher self for agreeing to that. But apparently, and I've learned this along the way, that's how we evolve and grow, is by having these really difficult experiences and coming out the other side. And I feel like I'm just, having this one long run on stream of thought. So thanks for hanging in there with me. And I'll say one more thing and I'll let you ask a question if you want to. But I told him, I said there was a lot of fives associated with your birth and death. And he acknowledged that. We didn't say much more about it, but I'll bring that up later because he's gonna surprise me with something later on. But let's see. There's more to the story, but do you have any questions so far before I go on?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for sharing that. That's very, very powerful, and very painful, obviously.
Yeah.
But what I would say, and certainly would suggest maybe, and you can clarify, is that you probably wouldn't have been led to do the work with people who are dying or who
Oh,
are dealing
absolutely not.
if it wasn't for
Absolutely not. Yeah,
experience.
that is
Yeah.
so true. That is so
Yeah.
true. Because really, I had lost my job at the title company, right? Everybody got laid off. The only reason I didn't get laid off is because I went on maternity leave. But once Alex had passed away, then I was laid off, and it was like somebody had pulled this rug out from under me, and I had to start all over again. And I think you have these moments in your life where you've just lost like, back around my birthday, 6 months before I gave birth, I'm like, oh, life's so great. I have this job I love and with people I love, and I'm going to have a baby and my second child, and everything's going to be great. And then all of a sudden, you find yourself on the floor staring up, going, what happened? I lost my job and I lost my baby. And
Hmm.
I had to reinvent myself. But there were things I had to do first, right? I had to heal myself first. Because at some point, when you are grieving so badly, you realize, um, because I was suicidal. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. I wanted to die. The pain of losing my baby was so painful and so strong and so great that I thought I'd rather be dead than be going through this. And I would look, I'd drive across bridges and I'd peer over and I'd be like, oh, is that tall enough? Could I die if I jumped off that bridge? And ultimately I'd be like, oh no, I'd only be paralyzed. That's not going to work. And so, I was death adjacent. I'm going to call myself that. I was death adjacent, wishing I was dead. And I finally realized that I had a decision to make. I had one foot in the grave, wishing I was dead with my son, and I had one foot outside the grave because I had another son and I had a husband, and I had my family. And I thought, I have a decision to make. I can either wallow and then die, or I can find my way out of this, grab some kind of lifeline and live, because I'm still here. And I finally said to God, okay, I'm still here. There must be some reason I'm still here, but I need help. And I remember about a week after that, I was having such a hard time, that grief had hit me all over again. It comes in waves. You'll
Hmm.
be doing fine, and then bam, that wave pulls you under again. And I remember falling to my knees next to my bed and praying to God or angels, and I'm getting goosebumps again. Um, Praying to God or angels or anybody who was listening, please help me. I can't carry this grief anymore. And if you want me to help other people, I need help. I can't carry this anymore. And I think this is probably the most miraculous thing that I'm going to share with you, is that I had a dream, and I'm not a lucid dreamer. I'm not. I wish I was, but I'm not. I had a dream, but in that dream, in that moment, I knew that I was not having a regular dream. I knew that I had been taken somewhere specifically for the purpose of healing. And I found myself, I'm a theater major. So I found myself in a very familiar environment. It was a very cozy, intimate theater, almost like you were going to a comedy club where there were couches around and things like that. And I found myself in this theater looking around, and I saw my mother, my brother, a few other familiar faces. And all of a sudden, everybody was filing in. And then all of a sudden, everything went dark, except illuminating the woman on stage who looked like a young Joni Mitchell, again, I'm a child of the 80s. She's sitting there smoking a clove cigarette with wafts of smoke going above her head. And I thought, that's the coolest angel I've ever seen. And suddenly the light was hitting me. And I heard her say very bluntly, but not unkindly, you, what's the matter with you? And I remember at the time being so taken aback, and all I could stammer out was, my baby died. Suddenly I felt myself fall to the floor, but my spirit was hovering at the ceiling. So I'm almost having like a dream within a dream. It was very strange. And I remember seeing my body on the floor going, what is happening? And suddenly, you go to a play and people will come in from the back up through the where the audience comes in to take their seats. This row of joggers who I've always been very health conscious, really kind of into working out. So this is very much, I think they set a scene that was very familiar and comfortable to me. This row of joggers comes in. They all come filing past my body, and each jogger leans down and goes like this. into my face. And I thought, that's very curious. And 100 people must have run by, men, women, you know, children of all ages came running by. And I thought, well, this is very curious. I remember hovering at the ceiling by myself thinking, this is so curious. I don't really understand what's happening here, but I'm just going to keep watching. And all of a sudden, like a marionette, I feel myself stand back up by some unknown mysterious force. And my young Joni Mitchell angel is still very nonchalantly sitting on her tall stool, smoking her clove cigarette still. And she looks at me and she goes, how do you feel now? And I said, fine. And I did.
Wow.
And I woke up the next morning and my grief, Julie, had been lifted. My grief had been taken away from me. I felt like I could fly.
Wow. Wow.
And I'm getting goosebumps all over again. Someone's here with us. And I think in those moments, so many times we pray and we think, oh, well, they didn't answer my prayer. But I remember thinking, I begged and I prayed and I pleaded, and they came and answered my prayer. And I think that they must have thought, well, okay, if she's serious about helping others and telling her story, I guess we have to help her because she's not going to make it if we don't help her out of this. And at some point you go along and you realize you can't hold on to anger and at other people, because guess what? It's not hurting them. It's only hurting you. And even though you don't want to hang on to that grief, you have to have help moving it along. You have to, or it just sits with you. And I remember waking up that morning thinking, how lucky am I to have had this miraculous healing? How lucky am I?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that was probably my moment where I realized that things are not always what they seem. A lot of people don't believe in this. A lot of people don't believe in life on the other side. And anyway, my joy could not be contained. And I have a funny story I'll tell you.
Wow.
I was actually scheduled to visit my family in Fresno that day. So I was living in the Bay Area. Fresno's about a 2.5-hour drive. And you have to drive through some agricultural land. And we all knew that was kind of the place you could speed. You could drive a little faster. We used to call it affectionately Tomato Run Road, because there was all these tomato processing plants and huge tomato trucks. And you'd get behind one and you'd hang out for a while. And then you'd whiz around it and you'd carry on zooming. And I remember I was zooming down Tomato Run Road and just this exuberant joy just at my miraculous healing. And all of a sudden I see these lights behind me. And I'm like, oh, I'm getting pulled over. Oh, well. And normally I'd be like, oh, no, I'm so nervous. I'm going to cry. There's a police officer behind me. So I get pulled over. I roll down my window. He walks up to it. And I look at him and I said, hi. And he just looks like, what? And I don't think he normally gets greeted that way. And he was so taken aback. And I looked at him, I said, the most miraculous thing happened to me last night. I just started on this 5-minute spiel, and he's kind of looking at me with this incredulous look. And I suddenly look at his name tag and I said, oh, you're Portuguese. I'm Portuguese. And so we started talking back and forth, and come to find out that our family was from the same island in the Azores, that our ancestors were from the same island. And needless to say, I did not get a ticket.
Wow. That's so funny.
It's just a funny little story, but I was not going to let anybody steal my joy. And to this day, that is one of the lessons that I've learned. Do not ever let anybody steal your joy, because
Mm-hmm.
it is something that's so precious, so valuable. But anyway, I have more stories, but I'll stop because I feel like I'm doing all the talking.
No, but that's wonderful. I mean, I've just loved
Yeah.
hearing the whole story. But I'm interested, I'm sure viewers be interested in, how did you get from that place to then deciding to become a death care counselor? How did that happen?
Okay. So so shortly after the my dream healing, I stood in my bedroom one day and I said, okay, what am I supposed to do next? give me some direction because I'm lost. I don't, you've helped me heal. And I'm not going to say that was an instant process because there was more healing needed along the way. And, Reiki, massage, all sorts of things, somatic therapy. And it took years. This took a long time. This was not an instant process. But after that miraculous angelic healing, I said to, again, whoever's listening, God, my spirit guides, angels, whoever's listening, can you please give me a sign? How do you want me to help other people? And Julie, about 3 days later, we decided we were going to go to Hawaii. And I called this rental car agency in Hawaii and I said, "Oh, um, hi, I wasn't sure you were there. Nobody picked up the phone. It was just ringing and ringing." And he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry. My mom has just died." And he started telling me the whole story about her cancer and her death. And I just felt very oddly comfortable listening to him. And I found myself filled with comforting words that I didn't know I had, a grace that I didn't realize was within me, and a compassion. And I got off the phone and I thought, I think I really helped him. Then I went to the gym about 3 days later, and a woman was sitting on the bench by herself after her workout. And I said, "Are you okay?" And she had, I think it was her sister had just passed, started telling me all about her sister and her sister's passing. And same thing. I listened. And this happened to me again about another week later. So after about the fourth time, I thought, oh, okay, death care industry. Okay, all right. What could I do in the death care industry? And so I started researching what could I do in the death care industry, and I came up with funeral director, and that felt absolutely right. And this is another funny story. I called my dad. I said, "Dad, you know how now that I'm feeling better, I have to figure out what I was going to do next." And he said, "Oh, sure, honey." He lives in North Carolina. "Sure, honey. Yeah, I remember." And I said, "Well, I'm going to be a funeral director." And I hear this long pause, and he doesn't say anything for a really long time. And he goes, "Well, sweetie, you've always been real good at planning parties." I kind of thought, great, I have my dad's blessing. And I started researching, where could I go to school to learn how to become a funeral director? And I actually started commuting one night a week to Sacramento. So it was about, I don't know, it was a 2-hour drive at least to go to school one night a week to learn how to become a funeral director. But I just knew that was exactly where I had been guided to and exactly what I was supposed to be doing. And when I finally did pass my funeral director's exam, I was just absolutely ecstatic. And I just knew that I wanted to help people, and this is how I was going to do it. And it took a long time to break into the funeral industry. It really did. I had to start out as a funeral assistant, and I finally ended up at a funeral home. And the family that took me, and I'm so grateful to them. It was a family-run funeral home, not a corporate-run funeral home. And they believed in me, and I'm so grateful to them for giving me that opportunity. And then, yeah, that was really interesting. But anyway, I went on, I got sidetracked a little. Along the way, remember how I told you the story about the fives? I had another episode where it was the middle of the night, and my son, he's a funny boy. He used to watch this show called Family Guy. And I remember one time in my room laughing because I could hear an episode he was watching, and it was this boy trying to get his mother's attention. He was like, "Mom, mama, mom, 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 mama, mama, mama." And I was like, "Julian, what are you watching?" And that was my son. And he's like, "Oh, I'm watching Family Guy." And I said, "Okay." And I just remember laughing. But I had a very similar experience where it was about 5 in the morning. And I could hear, it was almost like my son was calling me again, imitating that style of that cartoon. "Mom, mama, mom." And I heard this in my head. I'm sound asleep. "Mom, mom, mama, mom, mama, mom." And it just got more urgent. I finally look up and I said, "Sweetheart, what is it?" And nobody was there. He was sound asleep in his bed. And I look at the clock, and I'm going to show you this. This is what was on the clock.
Wow.
You see it?
Yes, yes,
It was,
yes.
it read time and temperature.
Yeah.
It was 5:55 in the morning, and the temperature was 55.5. So that was not my older son. That was my
Mhm.
younger son,
Mhm.
letting me know that he was with me. And ever since then, I see fives all the time. I mean, I remember walking down the street in San Francisco and seeing 555 as an address, and he'll prod me all the time. Mom, look up. Mom, look up. And I'll see it all the time. So I know he's with me. And the same thing happened with my mother after she passed. She died in 2022. So now I've started seeing 222 all the time. So I think having those experiences and landing in the industry that I landed in, I know without a doubt that when we leave our physical body, that is not the end. Our soul lives on. And it's been shown to me without a shadow of a doubt. And I've even heard stories, meeting with families at the funeral home. They'll say things like, I feel really weird talking about this, but my husband always liked to play pranks on people. And I was sitting in the dining room and the lights were going on and off, on and off, and on and off. And she was talking about being at home, the lights flipping on and off. And we're sitting there at the table in the funeral home, the lights start flipping on and off, on and off. And I laughed. I said, I'm pretty sure he's here with us. Pretty sure that's him. So
Mhm.
I think hearing story after story after story, it really made me realize what a gift that I have been given to be shown this, that our souls are going to live on and move along and learn some other lesson somewhere else. So anyway, that's how I ended up in the funeral industry is losing my son. But I think that what made me feel good is that knowing that he did not die in vain. I became a better person. I became a kinder person. I became a more compassionate person. And I was able to speak from experience. There aren't too many funeral directors that I knew that had that experience of having to recover from that grief. And I think being able to help people along the way based on my experience and what I heard from other people is really helpful. And I feel what a gift to be able to help other people and be brought back from that brink of wanting to die myself to being able to help other people along the way. But that
Mhm.
anyway, that's how I ended up being a death care consultant is I actually left. I was living in the Bay Area and I ended up with the boyfriend that I have now. And so he brought me back to the Central Valley, which is where I had grown up. So I've kind of feel like I've come full circle in a way, being back in the Central Valley. And but that's why I have my own little company now, is that I don't work for a funeral home anymore, but I still want to help people in any way that I can. So
So,
that's kind
so
of my story.
yeah, I mean, it's an amazing story, actually. So incredibly powerful and rich, and
Yeah.
a real testimony to what you can do if you have the courage to pull yourself up out of grief. And obviously, as you
Yeah.
said, it takes time and it takes effort, but
Yeah.
amazing things that can happen coming out of that, right? So,
Yeah.
can I just kind of unpick something I'd love to find out
Yeah.
if if someone wants to contact you to get help navigating grief or
Mhm.
trying to figure out a funeral plan,
Sure.
do you walk them through that? And
Yes.
how does that? What does that look like?
Yes. So I think working at the funeral home, the people and the families that were having the hardest times were people that had had a sudden death in their family, like me. Not necessarily the people who were expecting it because they have hospice. But when somebody would lose their loved one in an accident, for example, those were the families that I felt really needed a little bit more handholding, a little more guidance than maybe the coroner was willing to give them or the hospital was willing to give them. And I think that's really where I come in is if they just need to talk to somebody first, or if they need somebody to go to the funeral home with them to help them make arrangements, or if they need to talk to somebody to figure out what do we want to do? Do we want to have a burial? Do we want to have a cremation? Do we want to have a service? Do we want to wait to have a service? Do we need help writing an obituary? So I love to write. I wrote my mother's obituary. And I think that it really can bring your loved one to life, a well-written obituary. But I also think having a resting place for some people is very meaningful. I know some people think, yeah, I just want to, the ashes, they love the ocean. We're just going to scatter them in the ocean, be done with it. I think for me, it was very healing and very helpful to be able to visit my son at his grave and cry and talk to him. And everybody's different. But I think trying to figure out what it is that you need can really sometimes be easier to do when you're talking to somebody. Sometimes talking it out helps you figure it out. You know, what's going to bring you the most comfort? And I think I'd like to think that's where I come in. But, you know, I've also been contacted by people who have inherited ashes that maybe were sitting in their grandmother's closet. And, you know, maybe it's some uncle that they never really knew. I like to help people find their resting place too. Like, I'll give you a story of what happened at the funeral home. One day I was looking through we have a cabinet, where a secure cabinet where we would keep ashes. And the set of ashes had been with us over 5 years. And I suddenly looked at it and I felt the urge to pick it up. And I thought, wait, why did this person's ashes never get picked up? And I looked, and there was a woman who was listed as who was supposed to pick up the ashes. And I called her, no answer. And I Googled her name, and she had passed away. And
Mm.
so that's why his ashes were still sitting there, because the person had died. And so he was a member of the armed forces. And so luckily here in the United States, we have a program where anybody that's in the military is entitled to a burial at a veteran cemetery. So I was really happy that I was able to call a veteran cemetery near his hometown. And I volunteered to drive him to that, drive his remains to that cemetery. And we had a little service for him. And we got him, you know, into a resting place. And that felt that felt really good, to get him from the cabinet to a place of honor where, you know, he deserved. And that happened actually a few times where I was able to get somebody home to a resting place. So that's something I really like to do, is help people get to a resting place, or help their remains get to a resting place, if that's something that that person wants to do. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's actually quite food for thought, because that must, you know, you multiply that by hundreds of thousands across the world. There must be lots
Mhm.
of families who have a
Yeah.
loved one in an urn,
Yeah.
you know, in a cupboard, and either
Yeah.
not wanting or not willing, or afraid to make the wrong decision, or afraid to upset somebody, or just too busy to deal
Sure.
with it, or whatever, you know.
Sure.
And it's just a
Yeah.
sad way to, you know, even though we know, you know, this soul continues on and all of
Sure.
that, you know, the lack of honor around that is kind of heartbreaking, but
Mhm.
also difficult, you know, difficult to
Mhm.
kind of deal with sometimes, right?
It
So
is, if you're not in the industry and you don't know your way around a cemetery. You don't necessarily know that there's rules and regulations, and that, you know, you need a permit, and, you know, things like that. But that's, I think, where working at a funeral home helped me. You know, now that I have my own business, I kind of know how to navigate that world. And you know, also some people just need help recovering from grief. They don't, you know, they don't necessarily know. But on my website, that's why what inspired me, on my website, I have a list of healing modalities, which start as something as, you know, as easy to digest as a grief support book, going all the way to working with a psychic. And I kind of work my way down the list. And you're on that list. I'm happy to say, because you are amazing. And you were a part of my healing journey. And I'm so grateful for that. But there's a lot of things open to people, and not everything works for everyone. I had a lot of hit and misses where I would be like, oh, okay, that didn't work for me. Like, talk support groups. For some people, it really helps. For me, I got tired of talking about it. I needed help moving that energy along. So I'm not a grief counselor. You know, I'm not a licensed therapist. I don't want to take that business away from people that are, but my my goal is really just to help direct people to where they can be helped. And that's just kind of talking them through that, whether that's helping their loved one, you know, to find a final resting place, or helping them to heal. I want to be that person that can help direct them to what it is that they need. So,
brilliant, brilliant. And what's the
yeah.
name of your website? Just so that people,
Angels amid us.
angels
Angels
and
amid us. Yes.
great.
Yeah.
Well, I'll have all of that in the show notes so people can click and go.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
just realizing the time, we're kind of getting to the end. But before we say goodbye, would you like to just share any, you know, wisdom that you would like to others, you know, to take away with them? Or would you like to, I don't know, say something else that you haven't covered today?
I'm sure after we get off our call, I'll think of something, but I think the main thing that I want to tell people is don't ever abandon hope, because I believe with all my heart that even if you've gone through something horrible, that you can heal with the right support, and don't give up. You're here for a reason. You are you are an amazing soul, and I want to see everybody heal and do well. And there's always someone willing to help. It's just a matter of finding that life support, and finding that, and just you know getting out of it. And it's hard. It's hard when you fall into that, I think, pit of despair. But I was there. I know that you can make a choice, and you can decide to live, and you can decide to heal, and you can be empowered and empower yourself and find your way out of it. So anything I can do to help, I'd love to help. I'd be honored to help. So
Thank you so much. Thank
you're
you, Caryn. Thank you
welcome.
so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's an
This,
honor,
this
truly.
has been really wonderful, and there's a lot there for
Yes.
people to draw strength and courage from. So thank
I
you.
hope
Thank
so.
you so
You're
much.
welcome.
Good. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here, as always. Thank
Mm.
you, because we know your time has great value. So thank you for taking the time to join us. And as always, please share if you feel this content has value. And if you haven't already subscribed, you know what to do. So take it easy, be well. And that's all from us today. Bye for now. Bye.